Thank you, Dr. Brian Thomas, for your talk. It's a really interesting one. Do we have you? Can you hear us?
I think so.
Oh, that's excellent. So, as said, thank you. And I think the talk is really revealing, I think. I mean, it doesn't remain much evidence for evolution, basically. So, I'm jumping right on to the questions here. And my first question is if you want to say something about what do the secular researchers say, like when these things have came out, apart from not saying anything, of course, but what is their response?
Well, in my experience, their response, as I showed in the presentation, it's for every one secular researcher who promotes a certain fossil, there's another one who demotes that same fossil. In other words, for everyone who says this belongs in our ancestry, there's someone else who says no, it does not. And so that's my point, really, is that every proposed fossil suffers controversy, and that's really, I think, why Chris Roop, who wrote the book that I recommended, the book titled Contested Bones, that's why he titled it that, because every bone, every set of bones is contested. And the reason there's such contest or contention over these fossils is because there's no objective, it's totally subjective. And so you can make an argument for, or you can make an argument against. And so without the objectivity that real, quality science should bring, we're left, with this sort of subjective soup. Now, if you're asking the question, let's say that there's a secular scientist who notices this trend. For every colleague of mine who says this is a missing link, there's another one who says that that's not the missing link. Are there any of these that I can really trust to show evolution was true? I would say there are very few secularists who are even asking that question. Maybe a few are, but most aren't. And that reminds me of the Pharisees. The Pharisees in Jesus' day and time were confronted with the most evidence, that Jesus was God. They watched him raise people from the dead, heal people right in front of them. And they still disbelieved despite all that evidence in front of them. And so that's what the human soul is capable of, and I think that's the most poignant example of disbelief in the face of such strong evidence. The Pharisees really, really showed us, how bad it can get. And so, but there were a few Pharisees who did trust Jesus. There were a few Pharisees who did follow the evidence. And so likewise today, there are a few scientists who follow the evidence also, but most probably don't.
But then if you go to a museum, you don't see this messy picture that you talk about. They are trying to present a coherent picture, but as you're on to, it's maybe mostly the outcome of artistry then, or what's your comment about that? Like how do they manage to present the impression of a coherent picture?
Well, they have a narrative, and the narrative, the story of ape to man, evolution of from ape to man. That's the data don't. If you were to objectively look at the data, it doesn't. What you end up with is the data don't really support that story. Instead, you have either apes or humans. But with that story in place, the story itself becomes more important than the data. And then all the data are plugged into little slots, in that story. So they're made to tell, some subplot within that overarching narrative. So when you go to a museum or read your textbook, it says, we likely came from, fossil X, which likely evolved into fossil Y, which likely became humans. And so, but again, in the technical science literature, which sometimes leaks into news reports, but it doesn't seem to leak into the museums. You'll find contested opinions about each one of those fossils.
Right. So if you also want to comment, I don't know how much time we have here, but I'm interested in hearing what you think is the future of the field. Like, do you think there will be more? Like, we have DNA now from Neanderthals. Do you think we might continue with these ancient DNA studies and maybe looking into some other of these fossil findings, or where do you see that the field might be going in the near future?
We do have new technologies are coming online that are increasingly able to sequence older and older DNAs, and so that, I guess that's exciting because that gives you one more avenue of study. But I'm going to be pessimistic on my answer and say that the future of the field, if you can't get it right based on anatomy, I have no confidence that you can get the origins model right based on the genetics, because the genetics are what produces the anatomy. And so you're going to interpret the genetics into the same narrative. If this is what we believe, this evolutionary story, we're going to force fit the data into our story. And again, we're going to see in the future, the story comes first.
Right. We're coming back to this.
For most people.
The interpretive kind of filter or glasses that you have influences a lot. We have kind of came back to that a lot today. I think they indicate here that it's still time for another question.
Yeah,
so
I can say it's.
So I will head over to you.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the well-known Christian apologist William Lane Craig says he believes in an historical Adam, which is fine. But he also recently declared in his book with that name that he thinks that Adam was a representative of the kind Homo heidelbergensis, who is said to have lived some 500,000 to 750,000 years ago. And could you say something about that, and what you would like to say to Christians who feel inclined to trust Craig in respect to that? What do you say to them?
Well, Craig has a low view of Genesis. He always has had a low view of Genesis. He's brilliant, and he defends Christianity and does it really well. He defends the resurrection, but there's a blind spot. I mean, I think there's an issue there, because why would you defend the resurrection on the one hand, but not defend the other miracles that are in Genesis chapter 1, the creation miracles? So there's an inconsistency there, and so it seems to me, and I haven't read his book. I got it. I just haven't had the chance to read it, because I've been reading his papers and his opinions on origins for long enough to know the gist of where he's going. He just takes the secular standpoint and picks and chooses which secular stories he wants to refute and which he totally accepts. And to me, it's inconsistent. So a Christian has to choose: am I going to defend and believe Genesis, and maybe listen to some of the voices who are doing the same thing and see what they have to say, or am I going to just follow one teacher just because he's popular and whatever he says? So we need to be like Bereans and study the scriptures and not be devoted to individual Christian teachers as much, but be devoted to the scriptures themselves. And when we do that, we'll see that this evolutionary narrative that involves some sort of human population from which God might have selected a few individuals, that's nowhere in the scripture. And in fact, it produces problems with our origins in Adam. I mean, if you have Adam just being one individual and Eve one separate individual within a population, and then they get cursed, and what? Then you have people descendants of the whole population, so they're not going to inherit the sin nature from Adam, which is what we actually have done. So we have to go back to Adam. We have to go back to just two individuals. And why not? We have to come back from somewhere, and the scripture tells us exactly what happened. So I would just encourage people to take the good from Bible teachers, but also to test what they're saying against the scriptures. And I would challenge everyone to have a high view of not just the New Testament, but all the Bible, high view of the Bible.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I think that's an excellent ending word there, perhaps, unless you have something else to add, Ola.
No, I just want to thank you, Dr. Thomas, for a brilliant talk, and you're most welcome back to the moderated discussion later on today. So
sounds good.
Thank you. And then we will move